Welcome to the fourth plenary session of MINEX Kazakhstan Mining and Exploration Forum 2023. The session will address the opportunities for developing Kazakhstan's potential in producing critical metals and materials for internal and global markets. Critical materials, chromium, copper, germanium, lithium, and others, are essential building blocks for renewable energy technologies such as solar panels, wind turbines, and batteries. In terms of potential in mining and exporting critical raw materials, Kazakhstan ranks 4th worldwide. Kazakhstan accounts for almost a half of the world's uranium output and has large deposits of rare earth minerals. With its abundant reserves, the country is also a significant player in the aluminium industry, ranking among the top 10 producers globally. As demand for international investment and advanced technologies continues to grow, Kazakhstan is well positioned to become a strategic supplier of battery metals and other critical materials to markets around the world. Kazakhstan has recently emerged as a strategic partner for the European Union in the context of the EU Green Deal. It is positioning itself as a new strategic supplier of both essential raw materials and green hydrogen. The enhanced partnership and cooperation agreement between Kazakhstan and the EU highlights the significance of this collaboration, emphasizing the mutual commitment to shared objectives and joint ambitions. Join us in this insightful session to explore the various opportunities and challenges associated with developing Kazakhstan's critical metals and materials potential, as well as the steps necessary to establish the country as a key player in the global renewable energy market.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this final session of the day here, where we're going to be talking about critical minerals and materials. And we have a number of interesting speakers lined up to join us. I'd like to introduce the first speaker this afternoon, is Robert Thomas, who occupies a key role at the European Union in charge of critical minerals, and he'll be giving us some insights into what the EU is thinking and what the plans are for critical minerals. So welcome, please, Robert.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to start by thanking the organizers for the invitation to this very important event that focuses on natural resources and modernization of mining sector in Kazakhstan. I will be talking about two things. One, I will give you a short overview of policy development in critical materials in Europe, which I think is quite relevant, and then I will touch upon the strategic partnership that European Union signed with Kazakhstan in November 2020. So I would like to start by quoting that Europe is probably the most ambitious continent when it comes to the path on a net zero future. We would like to be a climate neutral continent by 2050, and obviously that creates a massive transition away from fossil fuels forms of energy into greener forms of energy and industry, and at the same time it also forces the change in consumption behavior patterns. We also have in Europe very ambitious digitalization goals of our industry. And last least, we, taking the geopolitical situation, it creates an obvious concerns, especially when you take the role of raw material for defense and space applications. So all this is driving the demand globally, demand for the critical raw materials. And I have just selected one chart to demonstrate that, but I think it's been said several times during the previous speakers. So, for instance, for lithium, the demand forecast by our colleagues from Joint Research Center is that in Europe we would need 12 times more lithium by 2030 and 21 times more by 2050. Of course, it creates a massive global competition, and what's more is that this competition is only at the extraction phase, but it is also along the whole value chain. So it's also in the processing, refining, and manufacturing. And I selected value chain of permanent magnets, rare earth permanent magnets, where Europe is almost completely dependent on China. In 2020, we already published this map of the dependencies, European dependence on critical raw materials to third countries. And 1 month ago, we published a new foresight study. And as you can see, and if you compare those two maps, they are almost identical. So nothing has really changed in our dependencies. And this is one of the drivers that push us to do something more. So we had our 2020 action plan on how to secure the critical raw material supply to Europe, but we needed to do more. And our president, during her State of the Union speech in September 2022, announced that we would be working on a new legislative package to create a new framework that would facilitate the sustainable supply of critical raw materials to Europe. And 1 month ago, we published this legislation package, which consists of a new proposal of a Critical Raw Material Act. It also has a communication that is where we have some non-regulatory measures when it comes to research and innovation, when it comes to skills, when it comes to diversification and partnership with resource and like-minded countries. But back to the act, and I will not talk too much about it, also for the sake of the time, but I will pick up some of the main aspects of this new piece of legislation, which is the main goal is ensuring, as I said, the secure and sustainable supply of critical raw materials. So first of all, we would like to define which of the critical raw materials are strategic, and strategic we mean strategic for those technologies that are supporting the twin transition as well as the defense and space applications. We also, for the first time, define our ambition levels. Ambition domestic levels when it comes to extraction capacity, when it comes to processing capacity, and when it comes to recycling capacity. In particular, we would like by 2030 cover 10% of our EU consumption of strategic raw materials. In extraction, we would like to cover 40% of our consumption in processing capacity, and we would like to increase our recycling capacity to 12–15% of our production, of our consumption. We would also continue working with our member states in monitoring existing viable and potentially viable critical raw material projects in Europe. We are supporting creation of new national exploration programs in Europe, especially knowing that we're working with Geological Surveys of Europe, Surveys Association, and we know that, for instance, these programs, the exploration in Europe, basically stopped in the 90s, last century. So we would like to revitalize this exploration effort in Europe, and we will be working closely with the relevant agencies. We also define, again, together with the member states, we would define strategic projects. It's a new concept that we are introducing in this act, defining strategic projects that would contribute to these ambition levels that we defined. For these strategic projects, once they are acknowledged, endorsed, they will enjoy streamlining of permitting process, and they also enjoy better investment opportunities. So we would be working together, private, public, to look for potential funding opportunities for these projects. When it comes to diversification, we also have put our ambition level, and that means that by 2030 we would like to be at the state that we don't have more than 65% of our consumption of individual strategic raw materials coming from a single third country. Okay. So strategic partnerships is one way of diversifying, of course, And here is a map of our activity in this domain. So you can see that so far, since 2020, we have signed 4 strategic partnerships. We started with Canada and Ukraine, and last year we concluded this partnership with Namibia and Kazakhstan. But you can see that we have other countries, resource-rich, like-minded countries in the pipeline, so we are in intensive dialogues with those shown in the map. So now back to Memorandum of Understanding of Strategic Partnership with Kazakhstan. So the underlying Memorandum of Understanding was signed on 7th of November by Prime Minister of Kazakhstan and on behalf of the European Union by President of the European Commission in the margins of COP27 conference in Egypt. It is about, of course, cooperation, and mostly it is about bringing the industrial integration of its respective value chains on raw materials, batteries, and renewable hydrogen. We built this partnership on existing frameworks, so we have already enhanced partnership and cooperation agreement that is in force since 2020. So we built on this, so we can see that this raw material partnership is in a way implementation of this wider political framework. We also, together with our partners, we committed to produce an operational roadmap of the partnership within 6 months of the signature. So the partnership is centered around the value chain approach. So we would like, again, that's a mutual beneficial activity, of course. So we would like to increase the in-country value by promoting the not only extraction but also developing the further up the value chain. The cooperation is structured around 4 main interlinked work streams. So first is about the integration of the value chain in batteries and raw materials. Second is development of the renewable sources of energy with focus on green hydrogen. The third one is about increasing the resilience. So this is about the trade, avoiding the trade and investment distortion, mitigating the value chain disruptions, and transparent exchange of information on trade and investments. And last work stream is about closer collaboration on research and innovation, skills and capacity building. Actually about each, so I will not read all the aspects there, but basically the integration is about identifying and implementing joint projects along the whole value chain, so not extraction again. It covers also modernization, technology transfers projects, and and making those projects happen. We will use our EU industry alliances that we develop, so namely battery alliance, but also raw materials alliance. So these are the collaborative platforms for matchmaking, for sharing the proposals and finding the financing and technology partners. We are stressing the importance of environmental, social and good governance practices, and we will be aligning and exchanging, of course, on those aspects and of the international standards. Last but not least, we both committed to explore the ways for funding, new funding instruments, and supporting the projects, to materialize. So far, we organized already some events. In December, for instance, we had a first business-to-business event that attracted a lot of stakeholders. We had more than 100 organizations attending, raising really the expectations for the partnership to produce concrete results. The next event is organized during the European EIT Raw Materials Summit in mid of May, where our partners from the Ministry of Industry of Kazakhstan will be presenting their investment opportunities in front of 600 plus representatives of European industry. Regarding the renewable hydrogen, Here, I just pick up points there that we will be, of course, supporting the development of renewable energy with focus on green hydrogen, especially as a means to decarbonize energy-intensive industry. We would also exchange and cooperate on improving the legislation that facilitates the green hydrogen economy. Regarding trade, I already mentioned, and I would like to highlight the last point, that's the closer collaboration on research and innovation. And this is very important. So here we would be fully using our flagship research and innovation funding program, Horizon Europe, for which Kazakhstan is fully eligible. And for your information, for the last 4 years, so 2021 up to 2024 programming, we secured almost 500 million euros only for the raw materials related project. Not to speak about battery and hydrogen research. That's another funding opportunities there. So, and here is a list of the topics that we agreed to collaborate, and we would facilitate, of course, Kazakh organization willing to join the consortia for putting up the projects, research innovation projects. We will be facilitating them to find the right European partners. Inclusion. Well, no conclusion. I would like to say that this partnership was concluded, negotiated and concluded in a really record time. I think that was due to really a very good partnership and mutual interest, to conduct this closer collaboration. Of course, we had already an existing framework that also helped. I already mentioned that we attracted already a lot of stakeholders, so there is a clear expectation from both sides to deliver concrete results. And we already concluded the roadmap, operational roadmap, with partners at the technical level, and we will be soon be endorsing this at the highest level. With this, I would like to conclude. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Robert. That was very interesting. I say we'll have some time, some questions at the end on some of the topics that you raised. I'd like to, in a slight change to the programme, we're running slightly late, so Simon Clancy is going to be joined right now in a change to the published programme, and then after him we'll get back to the schedule with Tremaine. So I believe that Simon is there, and
my presentation today contrasts the development of the mining and metallurgy industries in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, focusing on investor activity. I'll also look at what evidence there is cross-border convergence and conclude by sharing some views on the possible impact of the conflict on Ukraine and both countries' mining industries. Can we move to the next slide, please?
Yeah, there seems to be a technical issue here, Simon, which I believe they're working on.
All right. Shall I just pause, or shall we just keep going?
Well, I assume that for the moment you can just keep going. We've got a lot to get through.
All right, okay. So according to data just released by Kazakhstan's Ministry of Industry and Infrastructure, sorry?
Simon, sorry, if you could just pause for a minute, please.
Is there something wrong with the mic?
You can continue now, thank you.
I'm actually broadcasting remotely, so I don't have a mic on the stage. Are we good to continue in terms of the mics working?
Please continue, Simon.
Okay. Can we click on to slide number 3, please? Thank you. So, apologies for that. According to data just released by Kazakhstan's Ministry of Industry and Infrastructure Development, in 2022, foreign direct investment in mining rose by 25% on the 2021 figure to around $12.1 billion. The financial contribution to the state of mining companies in Kazakhstan, both state-owned and private, is significant, although President Tokayev recently expressed the view that with rising commodity prices feeding through to greater profits, Kazakh miners could and should pay more. To illustrate this, the state uranium mining group Kazatomprom, in dollar equivalent, doubled its profits in 2022 to $1 billion from $516 million in 2021. Taxes it paid to the state increased by 65% from $145 million in 2021 to $240 million in 2022. In 2021, the 5 largest mining groups all featured in the top 15 taxpayers in the country, paying $1.9 billion in tax, which was equivalent to 12% of Kazakhstan's total corporate tax that year. In 2022, these figures will undoubtedly be higher if Kazatomprom's recent results are a reliable industry indicator. For example, in March this year, Eurasian Resources Group was the first of the major private groups to announce the tax it paid in 2022, equivalent to $910 million, up from $703 million paid in 2021. In Uzbekistan, the national statistics are not exactly comparable. Mining's share of national industrial output in 2022 was 9.5%. In 2021, data from the State Statistics Committee shows that Uzbekistan exported $7 billion worth of metals, mainly gold exports of $5.5 billion, mostly generated by the 2 state mining groups, the Navoy and Almalik mining combinates. Mining in Kazakhstan is by far the country's most profitable industry. Navoy achieved net profits of $1.3 billion in 2021, while Almalik's profits that year were $431 billion. The 2022 full-year figures yet to be announced will undoubtedly rise, given global trends in commodity prices. Their tax payments and profit contributions are a vital source of revenue for the Uzbek state. State budget revenue forecast for 2023 assumes that 44% of all corporate tax payments due to the state and 86% of all corporate dividends received from the state will come from Navoy and Almalik. Can we go on to slide number 4, please? Thank you. This slide contrasts the differences and similarities in the Kazakh and Uzbek markets. Let me highlight 3 items of interest. Firstly, neither country has a single unified mining strategy document that integrates all the current and long-term strategic priorities, performance indicators, and critical data for geology, extraction, and processing, which we believe investors would find invaluable. In Kazakhstan, there is no mining ministry that states agenda and coordinate oversight. Instead, mining is the responsibility of a range of stakeholders, which include the Ministry of Industry and Infrastructure Development, which is responsible for oversight of the mining investment project pipeline, particularly in metallurgy, and the parent of the State Geology Committee. The Ministry of Finance, which is the 40% shareholder in Eurasian Resources Group through its State Property and Privatization Committee. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs through its subsidiary Kazakh Invest, which is responsible for attracting international mining investors. Sovereign Wealth Fund Samruk-Kazyna as the shareholder of the national exploration company Kazgeologia and the state mining company Tauken Samruk. And finally, the national holding by Direct, which provides project finance mainly to domestic metallurgy companies through its subsidiary, the Development Bank of Kazakhstan. Inevitably, this leads to competing stakeholder interests and surely makes a coordinated approach to developing the industry unnecessarily complicated. While Uzbekistan established a Ministry of the Mining Industry and Geology in 2023, which elevated the status of the State Geology Committee to a ministry, this is still in the early stages of being formed. For the ministry to have a real impact on shaping strategy and improving the country's track record on foreign investor attraction, we believe it will need to go beyond its previous mandate, which was largely technical oversight and regulation. Other government stakeholders also have a role in mining, notably the Agency for Strategic Reforms, which will manage the state shareholdings in Navoy and Almalik, and the Ministry of Investments, Industry and Trade, which attracts foreign investors through the Investment Promotion Agency. Secondly, both countries are investing heavily in new geological exploration and mapping programs, deploying technology to identify new exploration assets, and better quantify the unrealized potential of existing legacy assets, This is now proceeding at pace, and Kazakhstan expects to have 100% of its territory mapped by 2025. Thirdly, both countries are making significant investments to increase their domestic processing capacity, and in doing so, reduce their reliance on Russian metallurgy groups. Can we move on to the next slide, please? I now want to look at trends in investor activity in Kazakhstan in more detail, starting with exploration. This slide uses data from Kazgeologia's latest annual report for 2021, which gives detailed information on the exploration investment projects it is oversight of. Some of these ongoing projects date back to 2015, so the pie chart shows the consolidated total investments over the period 2015 to 2021 of the invested country of origin. Over this period, Kazgeologia concluded 27 joint ventures, 3 investor consortia. Total value of exploration investment was equivalent to $87 million. Of this, Kazakh investors, notably Kazakhmys and Kazink, had a 46% share, while Rio Tinto was by far the largest foreign investor. Overall, copper and gold exploration projects dominated exploration activity. Can we move on to slide 6, please? This slide uses data taken from Kazakh Invest's investor project list, which is updated quarterly. The data is current to the 31st of December 2022. At that point, Kazakh Invest had responsibility for the delivery of 40 mining and metallurgy projects, predominantly metallurgy, worth $12.6 billion. The scale of investments directed into constructing new processing plants was 43% of all investment projects, or expanding plant capacity, 36%, which is really quite striking. Also, the tiny investment for plant modernization, which suggests that most investors are opting to build new state-of-the-art facilities and not upgrade legacy assets. While Kazakh investors dominate these investments, 60% share by project value, Russia is the largest foreign investor with 17% share, followed by Korea on 7%. Note that Kazakh Invest does not disclose the identity of its foreign investors for specific projects, in contrast to Kazgeologia and the Development Bank of Kazakhstan, which I will discuss shortly. Can we move to slide 7, please? This slide summarizes the major metallurgy projects where foreign investors were involved in 2022 using data from Kazakh Invest. And there's some interesting points to note. 3 of the 4 Russian projects were agreed in 2022. One of these is by far the largest single foreign investment in metallurgy in Kazakhstan, worth $1.5 billion. China, usually ranked the second largest investor and trading partner in Central Asia, is a much smaller player in metallurgy investments, and 2 of its 3 current projects conclude this year. Korea also features with 2 large projects, presumably to meet the demands by Korean industry for critical metals like nickel. Can we move to slide 8, please? Kazakhstan considers metallurgy a key source of job creation. Growing the metallurgy industry will reduce the country's over-reliance of processing being done in Russia and better meet the needs of indigenous industry and export processed industrial goods to neighboring markets in Central Asia. The Kazakh state has so far provided $2.5 billion in financing for the development of the industry through the state-owned Development Bank of Kazakhstan. This figure is matched by $6.1 billion worth of private sector investment by Kazakh metallurgy companies. Can we move to the next slide, please? This slide summarizes the main mining groups and the key mines they own. The Swiss domiciled Glencore, which is the majority 69.7% shareholder of Kazink, Zhairemsky Mining Combinat, and Altental Kokshetau, respectively, features in all categories except iron ore. Russian firms feature in 3 categories: in gold, polymetal and Nord Gold, and copper and zinc with Russian copper. This underlines that, notwithstanding the ongoing geopolitical situation, Russia remains a significant player in mine operation as well as in metallurgy in Kazakhstan. If we move on to the next slide, please. By way of comparison, I want to briefly review the state of Uzbekistan's mining industry. This slide describes the Uzbek state's key investment priorities for the mining industry using data published in the State Investment Strategy 2022 to 2026. Overall, mining represents 7.5% of all incoming foreign direct investment and credits expected over that period. Among almost all of the planned investments in mining which are being invested in Almalik and Navoy mining combinats. The Uzbek government aims to secure up to $6.7 billion worth of loans from foreign and domestic financial institutions to finance the modernization and expansion of their facilities. It will match these funds with around $600 million of state funds. If we move on to the next slide, please. The table you see in this slide gives an overview of the main deals foreign companies have secured in the Uzbek mining industry in the past 3 years, although it's by no means an exhaustive list. In 2022, there were 11 ongoing and new foreign investments in mining, exploration in Uzbekistan, while the total value of these investment deals, which span 2019 to 2030, is $3.5 billion. The investment committed in 2022 was only $76 million. The biggest of these deals to date are Enter Engineering's option to invest $2.3 billion to process iron ore between 2021 and 2030, and the Russian copper mining group UMMC, which is investing $560 million in gold exploration and processing between 2022 and 2026. The French mining group Orano is the largest Western company active in Uzbekistan, investing $400 million to extract 7,000 tons of uranium from 2019 to 2025. A key pillar of Uzbekistan's mining strategy is to substantially increase the percentage of raw materials that are processed, both domestic and overseas industries, notably the automotive and consumer electronics industries. In 2022, 60% of copper mined in Uzbekistan was exported as raw copper for processing elsewhere, according to the Ministry of the Economy. This in turn has created opportunities for firms like Hatch in Canada and Project Consult in Germany to advise the Uzbek government and Almalik on the strategy and production infrastructure for processing copper in these two copper clusters that have been formed to date, one in Angren in the Tashkent region and the other in Kakand in the Fergana region. If we move on to the next slide, please. While overall trade between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan is growing strongly, so far there is little evidence of cross-border activity in mining and metallurgy. 2 points are worth noting. Firstly, Halyk Bank, Kazakhstan's largest bank, was among the syndicate of international banks who provided $1.2 billion worth of financing to the Navai Combinat in July 2022. Halyk Bank is a well-established subsidiary in Uzbekistan called Tenge Bank, which is mainly serving Kazakh businesses active in Uzbekistan. Secondly, we understand that Eurasia Resources Group recently established a representative office in Uzbekistan, which suggests it's actively looking at opportunities in the market, probably in iron ore, steel production and processing. As Almalik and Navai dominate Uzbekistan's mining industry, both in exploration and processing, in the short term, there appears to be limited opportunities for major Kazakh mining groups to be influential actors in the industry through forming joint ventures with the two combinats. Meanwhile, the Uzbek government has no plans to fully privatize Almalik and Navai. Any partial privatization would lead to the sale of no more than 10 to 15% of either business, which suggests that any investor is likely to be an institutional investor rather than a major private sector Kazakh mining group who would be seeking greater influence on Almalik and Navai's strategy and operations. We cannot, however, rule out a state mining company in Kazakhstan doing a deal as part of a wider political agreement to grow ties. In the other direction, Uzbekistan lacks sufficient private mining companies with the necessary scale, finance, or experienced professionals needed to enter the Kazakh market in any significant way. Moreover, Almalik and Navai mining combinats, while large, are solely domestic businesses. Lastly, I would just mention that the Sharia family with strong links to both countries are owners of major mining and metallurgy businesses, which are likely to increase their interaction and cooperation between both countries. And now I'd just like to move to my final slide, slide 13. I want to conclude my presentation with some comments on how the Russian-Ukrainian conflict is impacting relations between Russia, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan, and on mining specifically. Conflicting forces are at play. On one side, Russia's increasing isolation from many of the international economic trade and investment systems are making all Central Asian countries, for the first time, rethink their future relationship with what has been their key partner. That is stimulating greater efforts by Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan to increase the share of trade from other non-traditional export markets, including Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Turkey, and European markets like Germany and France. On the other side, Russia is making tremendous efforts to keep all the Central Asian countries within its sphere of influence and maintain its status as their leading trading partner, notably in the energy market, through a proposed gas energy union involving Russia, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan. We have already highlighted that Russia is the largest investor in Kazakhstan's metallurgy sector, with substantial new deals agreed in 2022, and is also the operator of several of Kazakhstan's largest mines. And we think this trend is likely to continue. While Kazakhstan is a long-standing member of the Eurasian Economic Union with Russia, Uzbekistan has yet to make a final decision on full membership, which, if it were to go ahead, would seem to be a clear signal as to where Uzbekistan's primary loyalties lie. We expect that Russian mining equipment manufacturers, engineering and construction firms, and project management groups active in both countries will continue to receive substantial support from Russian state banks. This is vital to ensure the continued price competitiveness of their offering in export markets versus Western competitors, although they may not be able to match Western firms' technological capabilities or after-sales service standards. The other key element of Russia's future trade and investment strategy is reaching more agreements to localize production in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. The Russian steelmaker Yepras already operates a plant in Kazakhstan. To date, these deals in Uzbekistan include manufacturing pharmaceuticals and assembling KAMAZ truck components, but could well extend to Russian metallurgy firms localizing the processing of raw copper and non-precious metals for a range of industrial and consumer uses with Uzbek partners. And on that point, I conclude my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Simon. Certainly some very, very interesting content there. I apologise for the quality of the sound. But certainly some of the points he made here was an interesting angle to hear him compare and contrast the two neighbouring countries there. And, there's a lot to digest from that. Our next speaker is Tremaine Woods from SA, and he's going to talk about the critical mineral potential in Kazakhstan for exploration. So take it away, Tremaine.
Thanks. All right, so my presentation is a high-level view of some of the demand for critical metals, as well as the exploration potential within Kazakhstan. Just a quick word about who we are. I'm from MSA. We provide a large amount of services across the mining spectrum, and a lot of that is focused on exploration. My background is in exploration. And our focus has recently shifted a lot to Kazakhstan. And in Kazakhstan, we're seeing this increased interest in something called critical materials. And there's been very many versions of this over the years. This is not a new concept. Lists seem to be changing all the time. Various institutes now publish almost annual or biannual lists of critical materials and critical metals. And these are really any materials, any elements that are quite essential for modern technology, electronics, industrial purposes, commercial purposes. All right, and we've seen a lot of interest, especially from the strategic agreements between the UK, EU, and if you look at some of the lists they publish, there's really quite a large amount of the elements on that periodic table there that are important to them. I considered looking at a few more, but once you start to delve into this, there's really quite a story behind each and every one of these elements. So I've just selected a few from that list, and I've also decided to focus on critical metals. These tend to be a little bit more scarce, and they have complexer supply chains and processing requirements. All right, and as Thomas pointed out in his presentation earlier, one of the major drivers of this is differentiation. A lot of the supply is focused on China or other countries that come with some inherent type of risk if there's some kind of disruption. So really we would want to focus on being able to differentiate supply in some of these metals. And Kazakhstan certainly has potential for that. Why is that? Well, Kazakhstan's pretty rich in natural resources, recently, we've seen a move to some really invest-friendly policies. There's a stable political climate here, suitable exploration policy, a growing economy, and there are areas within Kazakhstan that are certainly suitable to modern exploration techniques. So the first metal I'd like to have a quick look at is cobalt. Why is it critical? Well, we know that every cell phone and many of the batteries that will drive the cars of the future requires cobalt. In a large portion of this comes from the DRC. Within that slide, you can see on the bottom left there's a graph which shows estimated supply and supply shortfall, and you can see that in the next few years we're due for a shortfall in supply to provide enough cobalt for this green revolution that we're all looking forward to. So in general, in Kazakhstan, where would you start to look for cobalt? Well, certainly within some of the laterites that you see dispersed around the west and concentrated along the border of Russia in the east of Kazakhstan. Those have potential, but many of them are undeveloped. The potential of the resources, of the total resources, aren't too well known. And they also overlie these magmatic nickel copper sulfides in some cases. So there's some potential there for exploration. But the trend with these deposits tends to be that they're underexplored, and the results that have been produced require further drilling to determine if there's sufficient resources to continue. Second, I'd like to have a look at why is this so critical to us? Well, we do have quite a lot of supply of world copper at the moment, but if forecasts are correct and we continue to demand lots of copper to drive this green revolution, we're going to require additional copper supplies. And forecasts into certainly 2030 and 2040 show that copper demand is still due to double, with many mines due to close or to run out. So we will require additional resources of copper in the future. Why does Kazakhstan have good potential for these? Well, it's actually a well-known copper district. There are plenty of mines, plenty of known occurrences. There's a good diversity of deposit type here. And there's certainly exploration opportunities a little deeper down using new techniques. So this really provides opportunity to expand the already large reserves that Kazakhstan has, and certainly we would like to see new exploration into this commodity. Lithium, this is one that we're all very familiar with, and that graph in the bottom left of the slide should be nothing new to many people, and it shows that as we move towards electrifying our vehicle fleets and as we aim to hit these targets set by various organizations, that we'll end up in a short supply of lithium in the future. Lithium in Kazakhstan, well, certainly there's some interesting opportunities here. In east of Kazakhstan, there are some small pegmatite deposits. Some of these tend not to be well developed or really quite small, and traditional exploration into those areas, there certainly seem to be some opportunities for additional resources there. As well as a drive to explore and really investigate these residual brine deposits in the country. Certainly one area that comes to mind as having potential is the old Aral Sea area, as well as some smaller areas out in the west of Kazakhstan. Nickel, which is increasingly becoming an important metal for the green revolution, especially battery-grade nickel. That's because, in general, for battery-grade nickel, you require a sulfide-type deposit, and a lot of nickel is still supplied out of Southeast Asia. So we would want to diversify this in order to make sure that we don't have a shortfall that some studies have predicted for the future. And once again, these potential exploration areas, the known occurrences of nickel, they seem quite narrowly constrained. We've worked with clients out in West Kazakhstan, studying some of their magmatic sulfide nickel deposits, and really what's apparent out there is just how remote it is and how new exploration is required into these areas, new budgets to drill out the potential deposits. And the final metals or elements that I'd like to have a look at is rare earth elements, and I think that we know the story quite well. Most of the rare earth elements supplied to the world, which are required for electric motors, various electronics, those are supplied out of China. So there is quite a large risk of these, as we've seen in the past. And in order to diversify this, we need to find new deposits of rare earths that are economically extractable. Kazakhstan, what opportunities do we see for rare earths in general? Well, if we have a look out in the east, in a similar sort of region to where you would find your lithium pegmatites, there are also there are other intrusive bodies that hold potential for rare earths in those intrusives. Similarly, there's opportunities to investigate the clay deposits out in the northwestern Kazakhstan area. A company that's currently looking at this is East Star Resources, and their recent drill results show that there is some potential for rare earths there over this really quite large granitic intrusive. So certainly there's some opportunities there to continue to investigate this, and one of the key points there will be extractability of these rare earths over those types of deposits. Certainly there are opportunities that might not have been explored before in the region, and these are worth investigating. I think really the story with many of these is that in order to continue to find deposits, in order to continue to explore these areas, new dives into this kind of exploration is required. Other opportunities will perhaps in the research space improve techniques for processing techniques that can potentially unlock metals that are contained in residual deposits, and then reprocessing those might provide opportunities, as well as processes such as in situ leaching, which do seem to hold potential, but there's still some way to go to make those economically viable. And then additionally, we've heard what's said about policies and incentives, but really those policies, as well as being for the production of these metals, they need to be focused at exploring for these metals. Exploration requires quite a lot of financial input, and as we've seen from some of the presentations today, they tend to be focused on the traditional metals, gold, copper, and if we're going to unlock some of these other metals, we need financial aid and policies that will drive investors and drive explorers to search for these. And as we've seen in other regions, partnerships. They really can help access previously uneconomic deposits. So really, any combination of these are required to really drive exploration into these areas. Just as a last comment, I would say that there are many other metals that have potential in Kazakhstan. Recently been discussed on various forums, and so each one of these there are opportunities in Kazakhstan as byproducts from other processes and in other residual deposits or within tailings. And these can all be unlocked, but they require further input and exploration. And with that, thank you.
Thanks, Jermaine. Now, moving on, our next speaker is Mark Cheshire from AMC, and he's going to talk about the supply and demand of battery materials and how it's changing mining.
Right, well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Mark Cheshire, and it's a pleasure to be here with you again at MINEX. How are we all feeling? So it's done home at the moment, a couple of presentations to go, and let's get some energy levels up and talk about a fascinating topic of commodities, particularly copper, and discuss some of the issues that will become critical and drive development over the next few years. The current trend towards electrification of transport will fundamentally change the usage of some commodities. This graph shows the comparative use of metals in cars powered by electric engines and internal combustion engines. Many metals are not represented at all in the internal combustion engines, such as lithium, nickel, manganese, graphite, zinc. Depending on the type of battery utilised in the electric cars, the proportion of metals will change significantly. However, no matter the battery type, copper and nickel remain common ingredients to all. Not only that, copper is used in electronics, white goods, power generation, power transmission, and a host of other applications. And some governments are now calling for electrification of everything in an attempt to drive the world economies to use renewable energy sources. I agree that these objectives are essential, and I think will influence the future direction of our industry for many years to come. So while we hear about the drive to produce more battery metals, I believe the real change in the industry will be in the use of the key base metals, copper and nickel. Some of the issues behind the shortages are outlined in a recent public white paper on this topic, so I direct to the AMC website for that paper and more details. But for today's discussion, let's take the case of copper, as it's really quite significant in my opinion. Already we see that copper combined stockpile levels for London and Shanghai are around half the level they were at 5 years ago, and now sit at the lowest level in around 35 years. Given the increased usage over time, I suspect that our stocks per daily consumption would be at their lowest ever level. We can also see that the price has responded to this and has risen to $9,000 a tonne, which seems a pretty reasonable sort of price. But is it unusually high? And you might ask whether it's sustainable. Let's look at the historical prices over the last 120 years. Taking account of inflation, the longer-term answer would have to be no. Prices are not excessive. Recent gains are only catching up with inflation. And since this graph published in 2001, the price continued to stay high and remains around the $9,000 a tonne mark. So current pricing is, I think, within a realistic range. Goldman Sachs has even forecast next year or so around $12,000 a tonne, which would see the price starting to test all-time highs in real currency but not exceed those highs unusually. Are we in a super cycle? I don't think so. You would expect as prices increase, though, producers should be improving their margins. Maybe not so. Even though price is testing all-time highs, we are seeing reduced grade. This graph covers the same period as the price chart. Even though the real price is about the same as it was 120 years ago, the average mine grade has fallen about 1.4% to around 0.4%, meaning that we must be far more efficient at mining and processing to produce metal for the same real cost as we did 120 years ago. With regular cycles like the one we're in now, you could argue we've been here before, and I think we'll be able to get out of it again.
In previous times of shortage, we've always been able to find more resources, but maybe not so this time around. This graph shows the exploration expenditure yearly since 1990. It indicates the relative success in the 90s and 2000s. However, in the last 15 years, we've seen a declining success rate even after significantly increased expenditure. It indicates that we're going to need significantly more effort and money to make a difference to the number of copper projects found and developed. Given the prospect of long-term improved prices, you would think that we would see investors flocking to the industry. Unfortunately, not so. Well, so how do we redress this situation? We obviously need more projects, and the factors I've listed here should drive development, but we're not seeing the sort of increased expenditure needed. Even though most people believe that the long-term price outlook is positive, investors are hanging back. Banks and institutional investors seem reluctant to lend in the now timeframe, where price is responding to a slowed China economy. This short-term view, totally out of step with the long-term attractiveness of the copper sector. It seems that private equity is the only way that companies can secure funds needed to shepherd projects through the long process of study, approvals, construction and commissioning. But I believe that this won't be enough. I believe governments have to identify copper as a strategic commodity, and they have to implement policies to encourage investment in exploration and mining. Perhaps even direct financing at low interest rates to incentivise companies to start the development cycle now, regardless of the current copper price. Some countries have already moved to do this. Canada has a multi-billion-dollar program for critical metals, including copper, designed to keep them at the head of the pack. Other governments, including Australia, should be pushing hard as well. Unfortunately, we don't see it. But no matter where it comes from, there will be more money available to fund and exploit resources. I believe the countries in the Central Asian region are in a fortunate position to take advantage of these programs, as we've heard in some of the earlier presentations, and increase their proportion of supply into the market. And we as an industry need to lift our performance in planning and executing projects so that they meet the original objectives of the key stakeholders. How do we do this? We need to assess the role of studies in project development. I believe that all steps in the project execution cycle are required for all projects. We've heard several other speakers talk about this, including Mark. Identifying what could it be allows the story to be told and funding to be provided. Identifying what should it be allows the most suitable option to be adopted. And identifying what will it be allows detailed planning and definition ready for funding and delivery. Pre-feasibility studies are particularly important and is a step where the owners have the greatest opportunity to influence the outcomes of a project. The main features of the pre-feasibility study are to incorporate the ESG requirements, identify material risks to the project and propose mitigating steps, identify the right basis of design, complete all the trade-off studies, complete preliminary studies for resources, technical, hydrological, geometallurgical, mining, processing, environmental, social, infrastructure requirements. We can also complete bench-scale metallurgical tests and preliminary process designs and identify the detailed data collection and assessments required for future steps in the studies. Once all these factors are well understood at the PFS level and the favoured option is chosen, then the project can move forward into the next stage with confidence. The usual lead time to production is around 15 years for copper projects. Many take longer, as we see in this table of recent entrants into the market. There's always the temptation to fast-track through the study phases of development to get into production as quickly as possible. But in reality, the study phase is comparatively short, and leaving out important steps can lead to significant delays and outright disaster if a project is not understood to determine the appropriate basis of design which meets the requirements of the stakeholders of the project. So if we use this PFS approach and identify the best design to achieve the outcomes, what else could go wrong? AMC did some research in the Australian industry about 10 years ago to look at the reasons that studies fail to achieve their original objectives. While times have changed, I believe the pitfalls are all still the same. The results just reinforce the need to do sufficient drilling, sampling and testing and develop practical schedules. Here are some more details of these factors that can be critical to the success of the project, and I'll leave it to you to review them at a later time. But what can we as a group do about it? I believe that it's important to align the experience of the study team members with the critical issues to be addressed. For example, the study for a deep and complex underground mine should be managed by an experienced and competent underground engineer. And a study for a complex metallurgical plant should involve key metallurgical and engineering managers. We should have sufficient peer review for the work by a specialist team with no interest in the project outcomes to ensure a diverse range of opinions on the project and its success factors. We need to utilise the right attitude for the study. There's always the temptation to try and make the study fit an outcome, rather than completing the work and then assessing the feasibility. This often leads to the use of optimistic factors to try and make it fit. We need to incorporate formal risk assessment at each stage of the study so we can identify mitigating factors and additional work that's required. And we should use benchmarking with reliable data sources to verify the outcomes are realistic and achievable. So hopefully that gives you an overview of the industry direction and some key steps for project development. I believe there will be significant pressure over the next 10 years to develop projects in a very short time frame. But it's also important to understand the underlying issues so that we build enduring projects that really fit our needs. Thanks very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. That was certainly a very interesting insight there. What caught my attention was the bit about the copper price only just catching up with inflation, and that perhaps explains why there's so few pipeline projects in the pipeline, is that that price has been far too low for far too long. Our next speaker is Vitaly Lochikev from Kunrad Copper Company, and he's going to talk about sustainable copper production. Thank you.
Добрый вечер.
Good evening. My topic is sustainable copper production in Kazakhstan, assuring value for all stakeholders. I will be talking about Central Asia Metals. This is the company that came to Kazakhstan more than 10 years ago and is stably implementing its project. The first project, it happened in Kazakhstan. It was Konrad project in Kazakhstan. It was established on the leaching method and production of copper using SECW method. It was something new at that time, 10 years ago, and we were pioneers in this production. We came and started this production. Now it's not a surprise for everyone, and now we can see a lot of companies that are using this technology, and there are a lot of them, of such companies in Kazakhstan. The plant was launched more than 10 years ago. We are producing from 12 to 14,000 tons of copper per year. The production cost is the lowest, and in 2020 we produced more than 14,000 tons of copper, meaning that we are exceeding our plan for production. The second facility, it's Sasa mine in North Macedonia. Central Asia Metals is the owner of this project, of this facility. We are talking about copper and zinc production. We are talking about underground production. The facility has been in operation from 50s, and the production is from 20 tons of zinc concentrate per year and 14 tons of copper as well. The resource base of this project is up to 2037, and the Konrad project is up to 2024. You can see on the slide.
On the slide, you may see our basic achievements, and you see the amount of paid tax, more than $2,200 million, and spendings for charity. And this amount exceeds $2.5 million. And you can also see the number of created jobs, both for our own employees and for contractors workers. The overview of production in the upper scheme, you see that we have started production 2012, and while we dropped a little as we started working in the second quarter of this year, and then until 2015, you see that we are within the corridor of 10 to 12,000 tons. In 2014, we made a decision to expand the object and the plant, and we additionally installed the workshop and additional infrastructure, and so we increased production plan until to 15,000 tons per year. So this is the maximum production capacity of the factory. We have our eastern dump, western dump, and production plan, as I said, was exceeded, and the plan of production for 2023 is varying between 12.5 and 13.5 tons, and the first quarter we produced 3,000 tons of copper, which is again 11% exceeds the plan. Average grade of copper under the irrigation is very low, and you see that the ore is very depleted, and also we found the irrigating material after the test, and we have a testing group at metallurgist platforms that produce tests of every project, of every block and every object, and we apply very sensitive approach to the system of irrigation and to mining. In 2023, it is expected that western dams would deliver production of 78%. And in the table, you see general data, and they are available. You can see them at any moment convenient for you. And on this picture, you see an open pit western dams, eastern dams, and SXEW plant that was located in the first part of irrigation, the eastern part of this open pit. The system of SXEW, I believe, known to everyone. It is quite ordinary system, and you can have a look at it and you can address. There is nothing difficult with it, but previously it was hard to do that step by step. We had to understand how it works in practice, and it was difficult to apply this technology. Difficult. We established a mini plant initially to understand whether it is worth constructing a big plant for the future. Labor safety statistics, it appears very good. About 1,700 days passed since the last injury with a loss of working days. We have a strong team in labor safety, and into objects we have our own fire depot that operate 24/7, and at any moment they are prepared to work in force majeure situations and fighting the fire. Unfortunately, it did not happen, and I hope it will not happen. Quarterly, we discuss proposals on improvement of labor protection and safety rules. Here we select the best participants and provide our awards. It is a good incentive, and any worker coming to a job assess the situation, and in the case of potential possible situations, they will specify it and inform the management on potential hazards. So as we are very good in social approaches. We established special corporate foundation grants that seeks for the projects and implements them all the time. We have our own construction teams that works on that, and the volume of sponsorship for 2022 exceeded $128,000. We have also changed our approaches in the sphere of training and education of staff. We selected about 5 candidates who got interviews, and we will train them at Medical University Kazakhstan. These guys will be studying at university on the account of the company, but the requirement is that they have to return to the region and work there for 3 years. And the most important thing, in 2022, Conrad company received the Paris Award as a socially responsible company in Kazakhstan among SMEs. And I believe this is a deserved award, and we received it from the president. It is great for us. It was a very good indicator. As for the environment, we also exercise very serious approach to the environment to ensure compliance with the requirements of the norms, and we are doing continuous monitoring, and we pay significant attention to the environment, as I have already mentioned. And this, we have an encouragement in environment as well as in labor safety. Any worker, any employee can come to the management and raise their proposals, and if these proposals are always really relevant and if it is really appropriate, this person will be encouraged. So the most important topic which is being discussed nowadays is climate change and preservation of energy and energy careers. On this schedule, you may see that we are quite efficiently decreasing energy consumption. If we compare ourselves with copper production, it took us certain efforts, but step by step we are changing and modernizing equipment, and we improving our activities with solutions. Heating is efficient, with equipment is working properly, and so on and so forth. So we approach to each minimal percentage very seriously that allow us to get good results. But with this, we decided to not to stop with the achievements, and we started the survey. It started in 2019. That time we decided that we'll attract the companies that prepared us pre-feasibility studies that assess the opportunities for using alternative energy sources at our objects, starting with solar, wind, hybrid systems, and so on and so forth. And since 2019, we have been implementing this survey, and in 2021, we implemented an additional survey that identified what we would like to achieve at the end of the day, and the directors board provided us a permission for the next step. And in the first half of 2022, we carried out a detailed adjustments of costs and what we need, and we accounted for different risks, and we made a decision to construct a solar panel with a capacity of 4.77 megawatts, and we are already mobilizing the equipment, and we started preparatory works, and the project passed through all the stages of approvals and expertise. The solar panel will provide us about 16 to 18% of consumed power, and the cost will be a little less than $6 million. As for education and development, for us it is a serious topic. Many companies nowadays often face the situation when the employees who have been trained and who graduated colleges or universities faster can start working in certain industries. For instance, XCW technologies. It is very difficult to find the employee who have just graduated the educational institution and started working in this technology. So the Camel approach is to raise own employees, and since 2012 we are all the time train our staff studying, so they do not receive only university degree or secondary education degree, but will also have mentoring and succession programs, and at the same time people are additionally paid for this training, being present at the site at the same time and sharing their knowledge. And for training and development, we also have different focus groups from different teams. On top of that, we have about 19% of our staff are women, and women are provided with additional preferences, additional benefits, and also we are serious with regard of providing additional leaves. We also provide financial aid to the members of to families of workers having 4 or more children, and also provide additional bonuses and presents for New Year. And as for mentoring program, we started it already in 2021. And since 2021, Camel all the time sponsors the mentoring program of women in mining industry. Usually 2 persons are trained and participate in these mentoring programs. In the most recent time, our risk manager and the head of station got this training. If you have any questions, you are more than welcome to ask them. You see my contact details, and you can address them at any time if you would like to clarify certain details. Thank you.
Next speaker, our final speaker of the day, I'm sure you'll be quite relieved to hear, is a guy called Roman Valkuchuk, who is the head of the Centre Energy Research at the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs. So please, Roman, take it away.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, I hope you all can hear me well. Let me introduce myself. My name is Roman Vakulchuk, as said. I'm from Kazakhstan, but currently working in Norway, where I'm heading the Center for Energy Research. And I should say that the study of critical materials in Central Asia, but also globally, is becoming an important part of our research agenda. And today I will present to you the results of our study, where we looked at where Central Asia stands with respect to other regions in the world in terms of the availability and resource potential of critical materials necessary for the clean energy transition. And we published this study with the One Earth Journal, where we provide this very detailed overview of Central Asia as being often seen as a missing link. And I should say that Central Asia, in this whole discussion of critical materials, is a latecomer compared to many other regions in the world. This can serve both as a disadvantage, but also a latecomer advantage in many different respects. So in this study, we looked at what role can Central Asia play in the global supply of critical materials, given the fact that, well, there's, of course, increasingly growing demand that was already discussed by other speakers. And so we wanted to see, well, to what extent Central Asia can be seen as a potential global player. Also, we saw, like, what are the main partners for Central Asia in terms of whether, you know, this traditional interest on fossil fuels resources is now shifting towards the, you know, increasing share of critical materials for countries like China, Russia, the European Union countries, the US, and many others. And so then in the end, we analyzed some of the opportunities and risk factors in terms of the partnership with some of the main neighbors and big countries. Why this whole topic is important, let me just recap once again, is that, well, we know that under the oil and gas sort of agenda, we had situations where some countries that were very much dependent on the import of oil, for example, they had to spend well, basically trillions, as you can see here, the case of the US spending to protect, for example, the Strait of Hormuz in order to guarantee the security of the oil shipments to the US. Of course, now with the, well, overall somewhat declining role of oil, and this trend will continue in the future, we may now have the situation that there'll be new bottlenecks, new types of, you know, supply chain dependencies in the area of scarce minerals and metals, which are needed for the clean energy technologies. Here is the summary of some of the projected demand growth. And I know that some of my colleagues already presented the numbers for lithium, for some other minerals. This gives an overview of how much is needed with respect to the target year. And you can see that some of the numbers are really breathtaking, when it comes to, for example, like germanium, well, reserves that would be needed to cover the well, the input in solar power, for example, technologies. And we see that some of the metals are used across different types of renewable energy technologies, like copper, iron, lead, but some of those are used only for one type of the technologies. This, of course, also tells us a bit more about the criticality of some minerals compared to the others. Now, when it comes to Central Asia, we first started with analyzing the overall resource potential of the 22 critical materials. So we took into account the existing list of critical materials back in 2021. And of course, every year we know that many organizations keep on revising their lists of criticality, including those by the European Union. That was just updated their list, I think, on March 14 this year. Many other organizations also, they keep on expanding the criticality lists. We now at NUPI also work together with the IRENA, International Renewable Energy Agency, for building a new list of critical materials, while giving, of course, all the new facts and all the rising demands from different players. So in Central Asia, we found that actually around these 22 critical materials, most of them has a resource potential in a sense that they are possibly available in, well, basically in volume that would be possible to mine. Of course, some of them require additional geological exploration, but at the same time, we see that, well, this whole diversity of different minerals, this is something that makes Central Asia is quite unique, again, compared to other regions in the world, like, for example, the Latin America. And this red line shows that, well, the criticality, the high level of criticality and high level of resource potential. And then the other colors show somewhat less, less, I would say, kind of more limited availability, but still you have those minerals in, basically in mineable quantities in the region. So this is how we actually managed to also to show how Central Asia stands with respect to the global share of those minerals. And to be honest, I should say, well, that it was really a difficult task to collect all this data and information. It took almost a year to collect it from different sources. And this is what we found. We found that Central Asia, although it doesn't really lead the, on most of those minerals in terms of the global shares, but on some it really has a substantial share. And we know that Kazakhstan in particular, of course, is the top player in the region. And Kazakhstan is like the second biggest producer of chromium, and also in terms of the available reserves, chromium is very much available in Kazakhstan, but also with respect to other minerals. Moreover, in the fact that, well, we have such a large, growth for renewable energy materials, we also should understand that now even like the availability of 5% of the global share is quite a significant share, right? So it means that even this can be an important contribution to the global energy transition and to the needs of those companies that use the input of those minerals. And our finding that with respect to other and comparing to other regions in the world, Central Asia is somewhat unique in terms of its diversity of its mineral base. I think that Kazakhstan in particular can and should be seen as a one-stop shop for many minerals. I think it's also an advantage that Kazakhstan has already mining infrastructure in place in most of the cases. And we also know that, well, according to many international organizations, the ability to cover the existing and growing demand for minerals should come actually from the existing mines, not so much from the new mines that will be, for example, explored and built in the future, because like the average mining lead time for basically for most of the new mines with respect, for example, to copper or to lead or to zinc, I mean, it takes from 10 to 20 years. Probably you all know that, right? So I mean, it's quite a long period, starting from the basically first exploration up to the production. And in that sense, it's really important to underline that the use and the expansion of the existing mines should be and will be possibly a very crucial factor in determining the supply of critical materials to the world markets. So this is what Central Asia stands in terms of its diversity of different kind of mines and metals. Of course, China, for example, is ahead of Central Asia, but still, I think Central Asia is one of those unique regions that has most of the minerals in place in terms of the mineable quantities. But if we look at whether Central Asia is actually being discussed and being seen as a market for minerals, we see that it's actually mentioned only in two reports. So it's mainly Kazakhstan, while there's no mentioning of Uzbekistan, of Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. You can see those countries, they got 0 hits. And we looked at basically at more than 100 different reports trying to find out which of the countries are seen as kind of an important hotspots for critical materials. So in that sense, we see that, well, Central Asia is really like a missing link. And we hope that with our study, we actually brought Central Asia in from the cold in terms of also kind of showing the potential of the region. Now, one of the previous speakers mentioned that, well, Russia has become an important player, especially in 2022. However, I mean, if you look at critical materials only, without looking at such materials as gold or other minerals that are not used for renewable energy technologies, then I should say in our study, we found that China has quite an important role to play. It's actually the biggest player. Even though there was so much attention on Chinese Belt and Road Initiative and its transport corridors and infrastructure projects, there has been little attention to how China has been actually expanding its mining facilities in Central Asia. And it's actually been quite substantial. So China at the moment is the largest investor and importer, at least it was before 2022, and again in the area of critical materials for renewable energy technologies. Also, if you look at the existing deals with Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, we see that Chinese companies are now among the biggest partners in terms of owning the majority of existing, but also like future licenses for like future mines. And also what we found is that China is the main export destination of most of Kazakhstan critical materials, in particular for such minerals as, for example, molybdenum, zinc, lead, or copper. And you can see actually that the blue column shows the year 2017, and 2020 shows the year by which the basically Chinese imports from Kazakhstan grew. And you can see that, well, it's quite substantial for most of these materials. So at the same time, we also assess the shares from the European Union, from Russia, from the US and other players. And they have been less substantial overall if you take the weight of all total minerals. So China plays out to be one of the key players at the moment. Now, of course, after that, we also looked at the risk factors that might actually affect the future of the mining and the extraction of critical materials in the region. And even though I said that mining infrastructure is mainly in place in Central Asia and in Kazakhstan, of course, we have the fact that, well, it requires new modernization and new investment, because some of the existing mines, they have been, well, under the pressure of being kind of, aging or requiring additional investment. Sometimes, also mining activities, not in Kazakhstan, but in countries like, for example, Kyrgyzstan has been a source of contestation, like because of sometimes, well, different expectations and different standards used by different companies. So it's also important kind of to promote, well, sustainable mining in the region for like any new foreign investors coming to the market. At the same time, there's also a risk that critical materials may slow down the economic diversification, in the sense that they would replace, for example, the dependence on oil and gas if they become very much mined. So this could be a factor of risks. Also, excessive dependence on one partner could be such an important factor as well. At the same time, even though I said China has become very important, we also know that the EU signed a partnership agreement with Kazakhstan last year, and this was already mentioned during the first presentation today during our last panel. And this is also a good sign in terms of diversifying the different for countries like Kazakhstan, but also for Central Asia, in order to avoid excessive dependency on one partner, but also to be able to serve the transition for different parts of the world, especially for the world that produce this so much needed new technology in terms of the clean energy transition. So here are the links to the studies. I'll be happy to send it, and also to send the organizers the links so that I can share with you, which provide very detailed overview of the basic position of Central Asia with respect to the global clean energy transition and its availability of critical materials. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Roman. Now, I'm aware of the time that obviously we started the session a bit late, but we have got time for just a few questions. While the members of the audience are thinking of a question or two to ask our panel, I've got a question to ask, but before that, I just need to say about Simon Clancy, who's left now, so he's not available for questions, but if you do wish to ask him a question, you can email him at kz@MINEX Forum, and they'll pass it on to him, or you can just get in touch with the organisers. But first of all, to start the questions, I have a question for Robert, and it's about, he was talking about the assistance the European Union would be giving to try and develop these critical minerals projects, and you mentioned some funding. And I just wondered about what's the process for example, a technology company that might have some innovative processing methods for critical minerals, how a young junior startup company with some good ideas could access some of that funding. Is that possible, and how would they go about it?
So thank you. Oh, sorry. Thank you for the answer, for the question.
So the quick answer would be that, and suggestion would be to get in touch with these European alliances. You know, contact the European Raw Materials Alliance, for instance, to present the proposal. And we are supporting them with this matchmaking process. So they are assessing, on our behalf, they are assessing the projects and to see whether it ticks all the boxes, including, of course, the environmental, social, and good governance aspects, but also, the aspects of the material, etc. So I think that would be the first answer. The second, we are also working with our partners like the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and so far they've been very positive about this partnership. They are following closely the roadmap, and they are active in this. So I would suggest contacting them with concrete proposals.
Thank you very much. Now, does anyone in the audience have any questions for our panel? Well, I take that as a no. Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for your attendance. Thank you for your patience, and enjoy your evening, and we'll see you back here tomorrow. So have a good evening. Thank you, everyone.